Welcome to God at Work, Stories of Grace and Faith. I'm your host, Chuck Groover, and last month we started talking about having a radical faith and basically how it presents itself so much differently from the way most people actually see uh, a modern Christian faith or Christian faith today. And I'm going to continue this month by starting to look at and in the following months to look at some examples of what this radical faith looks like as we find it through people in the Bible. So let me just start with a couple questions. First, have you ever been asked to do something by someone respectable that is just so out there you probably thought that, probably had going through your mind kind of, what have they been smoking? Or have you been compelled to do something where everyone around you probably thought that you were a few fries short of a Happy Meal? I know for me, there have been a number of instances probably throughout my entire life where either have been the case. And one that really comes to mind is my call to ministry. When I first felt a calling to ministry, I was unsure. I mean, I'm an introvert, not liking to do any form of public speaking. So here I am, someone, again, does not like getting in front of people, does not like talking, and I find myself being drawn to ministry. I mean, I'm the type of, I felt and still do to an extent that really I'm not the type of person to be taking on a kind of public role in ministry. I'm more the type of behind the scenes person, sitting behind the camera or at the computer, at the soundboard, not the one up front really doing the speaking. Well, the person we're going to look at this month was asked to undertake a big assignment that probably had himself and all of those around him questioning his sanity. And although I'm sure this is one thing in common with some of the other examples that we will cover through the coming months, Noah probably has the most extreme case of doing something that had people questioning him. All right, to kind of set the stage, we find in Genesis chapter 6 verses 5 through 7, when the Lord saw that man's wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every scheme in his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time, the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Then the Lord said, I will wipe off from the face of the earth mankind, whom I created, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. So, at this time, the world was far away from God. People did as they pleased and were focused on their pleasure rather than focusing on their Creator. Think of it this way. If you're a parent, having your child scorn you and push you away in hate, and all the while you still love them and want them to know of your love. This is probably how God was feeling at the time. But it got to the point where God eventually had enough, and even though had love for his creation, was willing to completely wipe it away. However, God's love actually eventually won out, in that he decided to keep a remnant, as we see in verse 8. Noah, however, found favor in the sight of the Lord. So who was this Noah that found favor in the Lord's sight? Well, if we go on, we find Noah was a righteous man Blameless among his contemporaries, Noah walked with God. The fact that he found favor in the Lord's sight was not due to anything that Noah did specifically, but more because of the Lord displaying his love. And this is where Noah's radical faith comes into play. In Genesis 6:13 through 22, we read that, "Then God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. Therefore I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it with pitch inside and outside. This is how you are to make it. The ark will be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. You are to make a roof, finishing the sides of the ark within 18 inches of the roof. Then you are to put a door in the side of the ark. Make it with lower, middle, and upper decks, understand that I am bringing a floodwaters on the earth to destroy every creature under heaven with the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will die, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. You are also to bring into the ark 2 of all the living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of everything, from the birds according to their kinds, from the livestock according to their kinds, and from the animals that crawl on the ground according to their kinds, will come to you so that you can keep them alive. Take with you every kind of food that is eaten, gather it as food for you and for them." And Noah did this. He did everything that God had commanded him. So, there are a few things that we can see about Noah, his faith. First, as mentioned, he was called a righteous man. The first thing to realize is that this righteousness was not due to good works, but Noah's good works came from his righteousness. And this righteousness was a gift from God due to Noah's faith. Much like with Abraham, who believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. The second thing about Noah's faith was that he was blameless among his contemporaries. What this means is not that Noah was sinless, because Jesus was the only one to live a sinless life, but that he lived a life of integrity, meaning his neighbors could find no fault in him. These 2 aspects of Noah's faith go hand in hand, because the one who has a righteous standing before God will live a life that is blameless before men. Again, the works are the result of one's faith, not the prerequisite for one's faith. The third aspect of Noah's faith was that he was obedient. He walked with God. This comes to a big realization when we find Noah being tasked with building basically a huge boat to preserve humanity, as well as representatives from all the animals and birds. Where in verse 22 we see that he did everything that God had commanded him. The biggest thing to take from this obedience was that Noah's faith expressed his trust in God. And this is also where Noah's faith takes a radical turn. So we have here a man around the age of 500 being tasked with building a giant boat. And not only was he asked to build this large boat, but he was more likely located in an area where there was really no source of water nearby that would make a boat of this size viable. So the people around Noah were probably thinking, here's this old man hearing voices and practically building a large boat in the middle of a desert. Then, to top this off, this flood that Noah was preparing for wasn't going to happen for around 120 years later. Basically, 120 years after it was announced to Noah is when the flood actually happens. So Noah's radical faith was displayed through his actions because of this crazy task that God had given him. In Hebrews 11:7, this faith got him listed in what many Christians term the Hall of Faith, where Noah is described with, "By faith Noah, after he was warned about what was not yet seen and motivated by godly fear, built an ark to deliver his family. By faith he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith." Now, you may be asking, why is this important to look at? Or why is it important to look at Noah's faith? As it is unlikely that we will be asked to build a massive boat or something that would seem just as crazy. However, it is helpful to realize that these men of great faith were still just men, and Noah was not exempt from that. I mean, when I say that, probably many of you think of what happened after the flood with the wine, but in Genesis 8:17 through 12, we see, "After 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent out a raven. It went back and forth until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see whether the water on the earth's surface had gone down. But the dove found no resting place for her foot. She returned to him in the ark, because water covered the surface of the whole earth. He reached out, brought her into the ark to himself. So Noah waited 7 more days and sent out the dove from the ark again. When the dove came to him at evening, there was a plucked olive leaf in her beak. So Noah knew that the water on the earth's surface had gone down. After he had waited another 7 days, he sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again." Alright, so Noah's testing to see about the waters by sending birds out. However, later in verses 15 through 17, "Then God spoke to Noah, 'Come out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds, livestock, those that crawl on the ground, and they will spread over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth.'" It seems interesting that before God gave Noah the command to leave the ark, Noah sent out birds to find whether the earth was dry. In other words, it appears that while Noah had faith in God and what God was doing and what God told him, it appears he was starting to get a little restless and impatient, waiting for the command to leave the ark. I mean, I know I personally, after being stuck inside a boat for a year, probably would have been restless myself. I mean, I'm the type of person that at times has to get out and do stuff. Get out and walk places, be outside for a little bit. Being cramped up in a room or in a building for days at a time would probably drive me crazy. And I know that there are some people that can be content just to sit at home all day and never leave the house for days at a time. Again, I can't really last a day before I have to go out and do something like drive or walk. So I can only imagine how Noah must have felt being stuck inside the ark for a year, basically, waiting for the okay to finally leave. So again, yes, Noah had faith and trusted God, but as many of us experience putting into practice the waiting on God's timing can be hard, and as Noah pretty much displays. I mean, I know at times I find it hard to wait on God's timing and would like things to speed along, yet still knowing that God's timing is perfect. But we, as humans, we want stuff done in our time frame. We're, I mean, the culture we're in today, it's often termed the fast food culture. We want it our way, right away. And again, this wasn't Noah's biggest issue. I mean, I mentioned it before, and in Genesis 9:20 and 21, we see Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. You see, the issue here is not the planting the vineyard or the making the wine, or even the consuming it. The problem comes when he consumed so much wine as to become drunk and thus found lying naked in his tent. The one thing about many of the characters of faith found in the Bible is their sins are exposed along with their faith. I mean, this probably is pretty much helps to show us that even though these are people that in our faith, basically through our beliefs, are held in high esteem because of their faith, it also shows that they're still just human, just like us, which, again, can be encouraging when we tend to experience setbacks while on our own journey of faith. So, the question about what we can take away from looking at faith, and more specifically looking at the faith of Noah. What are we to do when it appears God calls us to do something crazy? First, we need to place our trust in God and His promises. By this, first of all, if you haven't already done so, you need to put your faith in Christ and place Him as Lord over your life. Then it is to trust God that all things will work out for His glory and that nothing happens without His knowledge. The second thing is that we are to act in obedience to God's command. I mean, we may not understand the reasons, or we may even think there is someone else better suited to the task. But God has a reason for choosing us. I know I have at times thought, why me? As I never thought I would be called to preach or teach, being an introvert and not liking to be in front of crowds. But God has a reason for calling me to ministry, and I'm trusting Him to provide me with what is needed. Third, everything happens in God's timing. There may be a point where we wonder if God has forgotten us, or we think nothing is happening, but God is always working and will let us know when it is time to take the next step. I know I had times of wanting to start doing basically these messages, but for some reason or another, it wasn't until recently that I was really given the focus to get started. And finally, when we encounter setbacks and basically times when our faith seems to falter, remember, remember God's grace and reset our focus on Him. We are never going to be perfect, and we will fail at times. But the best thing we can do is to pick ourselves up and ask for God's forgiveness and place our eyes back onto Him, allowing the Holy Spirit to work on our lives and learn from our mistakes to keep from falling into them again. So, as I close out this episode, let me leave you with this question. Is there something God is calling you to do that you're hesitant to obey because it requires a large step of faith? Or maybe you have been called to something that it's not so much the step of faith it takes, but the thought of how others will perceive you for obeying. All I can say is remember the faith of Noah. Trust God and take that first step. Because when you put God in charge, all I can say is to fasten your seatbelt, hold on tight, and enjoy the ride, because what a ride it will be. Again, this is Chuck Groover on the faith of Noah, and that's God at Work. Thank you for listening to God at Work, Stories of Grace and Faith. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at God at Work Podcast. If you have comments, suggestions, or a story you would like to be considered for the podcast, you can email us at stories@godatworkpodcast.com. If you enjoy this podcast and want to help support us, go to patreon.com/GodAtWorkPodcast, or you can also support us by leaving us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. God at Work, Stories of Grace and Faith is brought to you by Becoming God's Man Ministries and is recorded and produced by me, Chuck Groover. Theme music for God at Work is by the band 39 Stripes and can be found at facebook.com/39stripes. And again, thank you for listening.